Welcome to Internal Affairs of the Mind, where we don't chase trends, but we chase the truth, where reflection is weaponized and reality's got no place to hide. Some people preach, some people pretend. Me, I investigate. I'm Greg Thompson, a retired cop with over 2 decades experience, but a lifelong investigator. And now, a full-time interrogator of the human condition. This isn't therapy. It's not philosophy class. It's an investigation into everything they told you not to question and everything you told yourself you didn't have time to. Let's crack today's case. Let's chop it up. So before I begin today's conversation, I need to acknowledge something about this episode's release date. By the time you're hearing this, it has been 100 days since my wife Ainsley took her last breath. 100 days. That number feels strange, difficult to say out loud, because depending on who you ask, 100 days is either a very long time or no time at all. If you've never walked through this kind of loss, some of you may wonder if things have started getting easier by now. If you've lived it, I think you already know the answer. See, the calendar keeps moving, but grief doesn't care. 100 sunrises, 100 sunsets, and not one of them without her absence. See, people often measure grief in time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, as if the calendar is somehow keeping score, or even necessary. But grief doesn't live on a calendar or a timeline. It lives in that empty chair, that text I can't send, the muscle memory of wanting to tell your someone about your day before remembering you can't. It lives in the silence where their voice used to always be. It lives in the responsibilities that now belong to one person instead of two. It lives in every ordinary moment we've often taken for granted before, but now quietly remind you someone extraordinary is missing. And if I'm honest, the weight doesn't feel 100 days lighter. It feels familiar, unfortunately. Not because I've gotten used to losing her. I don't think that's possible. But because grief has stopped announcing its arrival. It's simply becoming something I wake up carrying every day. And maybe that's what I've been learning over these last 100 days the most. Loss doesn't always feel like a crashing wave or a sudden overwhelming arrival of emotions. Sometimes it feels like an anchor, heavy enough that you never forget it's there, pulling you, present enough that every decision, every celebration, every quiet moment is influenced by its sheer weight. And maybe that's where the paradox begins. See, last episode we talked about permission. Permission to heal, permission to laugh, permission to date, permission to stop measuring love by suffering. We talked about the reality that moving forward isn't moving on. That grief and love can coexist. That carrying someone and continuing your life are not mutually exclusive. And maybe most importantly, nobody gets to decide when you're allowed to start living again. Not society, not strangers, not even family. Not people who've never had to crawl through this kind of darkness. You don't need permission to continue your life. But that conversation leaves us and left me standing in front of another reality. Because giving yourself permission to live and actually living are two very different things. Because that permission isn't peace. Choosing life doesn't eliminate loneliness, and deciding to move forward doesn't silence our grief. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I think this is where grief becomes the most misunderstood. See, some people I still think believe the hardest part is the loss, the diagnosis, the phone call, the obituary, the funeral. And don't get me wrong, those moments were devastating. I believe they divide your life into before and after. But eventually those before moments seemingly pass. Then comes something much quieter, much more relentless and gripping. Monday. I don't want to talk about the worst day. I want to talk about Monday. The random Monday where you're doing okay. The Monday where you're productive. The Monday where you laugh. That Monday where you think, maybe I'm finally finding my footing. Because eventually the casseroles stop showing up. The phone calls become much less frequent. People stop asking how you're doing. Not because they stop caring, but because for them, perhaps, the worst is over. The worst isn't over. The audience just went home. The world started moving again and again, as it always has, and it should. But your loss, it comes with you everywhere. See, the funeral had an audience. Monday does not. Nobody sends flowers on Monday or checks to see whether you made it through Monday. That Monday is where most grieving people probably do their heaviest lifting. And what I've learned is that grief isn't always a surge. Sometimes it's an anchor. An anchor attached to your soul while the rest of the world keeps moving the way they've always moved. You perhaps go back to work, pay the bills, you raise the children, you send and answer emails, you attend birthdays and smile in photographs. You look functional. Some would say you look normal. Meanwhile, you're dragging something impossibly heavy through every ordinary moment of your life that doesn't show up in any of that from the outside. And here's the truly strange part. Some days you almost just barely may forget it's there. You laugh, you make plans, you have hours that feel almost normal, almost like yourself before. Then, a song, a smell, the laundry, a kid's event, a random Monday afternoon, maybe no reason at all. And suddenly, you're not okay anymore. You feel all the weight of that anchor. People often call these triggers. I've never really liked that word. A trigger sounds small, sounds like an inconvenience, like something that simply pushed a button you should have known how to avoid. This isn't that. And maybe what bothers me the most about the word trigger is that it almost suggests I have some control over it. Like if I avoided the right song, the right restaurant, the specific date on a calendar, the right conversation, I'd somehow avoid the pain. That isn't how grief works. Those moments don't ask for permission. They don't wait until you're emotionally prepared. And they don't care, not one little bit, whether you're having a good day. They don't even need a reason. Sometimes there may have been a song, a smell. Sometimes it's a place you've been 100 times. And sometimes there's absolutely nothing. No warning, no explanation, no obvious or identifiable cause. Nothing tangible. Grief simply decides it's time to remind you what you're carrying, almost like it has a life of its own. Like it's operating on a timetable you'll never be given access to. It arrives when it wants, it stays as long as it wants, and it leaves when it's ready, not when you or anyone else thinks it should. This is emotional whiplash. It's like your nervous system got straight hijacked, like somebody reached into your chest and reopened a wound. And maybe that's the hardest part to explain or to navigate. Healing isn't controlled by time, as people suggest. Healing isn't a thing to get better just because more time has passed. Healing isn't progress followed by more progress. Sometimes healing looks like laughing with friends, but you're crying in bed afterwards, strong at lunchtime, destroyed by dinner. Healing, perhaps, is just grateful and devastated, occupying the same body at the same time. The paradox. And when you've lost a spouse, there's a whole nother layer. You eventually realize you're not only grieving a person, you're grieving a position. The person who carried half the weight, the person who helped make decisions, the person who absorbed some of your fear, and the person who stood beside you while life happened. Now every responsibility lands on one set of shoulders, yours. Every emergency, every school form that needs to be filled out, every sick child, every nightmare, every planning of the future, and every single fear. People call that or suggest that that is strength. I don't. Why? Well, quite frankly, strength implies choice. Most grieving parents, I suspect, aren't strong at all. I'm not. I believe we're just continuing because breakfast still has to be made. Homework still exists. Gymnastics class is on the calendar. Life refuses to pause. Grief changes everything about your capacity, while life changes nothing about its expectations. I want you to hear that. Grief changes everything about your capacity, while life changes absolutely nothing about its expectations. That reality is exhausting, not occasionally, but daily, relentlessly. Because here's what nobody tells you or didn't even consider, probably, in your fight. You don't just lose a person, you lose a home base. The person who knew something was wrong before you even said a word. The person who knew which silence meant, leave me alone, and which silence meant, please, don't leave me alone. The person who understood your fears without explanation, and the person who helped regulate the chaos of your days. The place your nervous system learned was a safe harbor, and you could ultimately put all the weight down. I heard something that recently stopped me, made me think. When you do not have a safe home base or someone who knows how to support you emotionally, completely, you are not just trying to build a life. You're trying to build one while carrying the weight of what is missing. I don't know if I've ever heard grief described more accurately, because that's exactly what this feels like. Trying to parent while carrying what is missing. Trying to sleep while carrying what is missing. Trying to heal, trying to laugh, trying to build hope while carrying what is missing. And maybe that's what these first 100 days have been trying to teach me. Not how to let go, but how to carry differently. Because healing was never about setting the anchor down. It was about discovering I could still move forward while carrying its weight. And somewhere inside all of that exhaustion, another truth emerges. Because eventually, after enough Mondays, after enough sleepless nights, after enough moments of proving to yourself that survival is possible, another realization begins to rise up beneath it. You weren't built to do life completely alone. And admitting that out loud can feel like its own betrayal. You still need love. You still need companionship, connection. You still need partnership. Not because the person you lost wasn't enough, but because you're human. The problem is, once you've experienced devastating loss, needing or wanting someone becomes utterly terrifying. Because now you know what that attachment can cost. Now you know what love can eventually demand. And you know exactly how painful the bill due can be. But yet, you still miss having someone say, I got this. Someone to laugh with. Someone to sit beside. Someone to carry part of the load. And eventually, you may begin considering allowing someone into your life from the outside. Sounds hopeful. From the inside, it can feel overwhelming. Because what exactly are you asking another person to walk into? You're asking them to consider loving someone whose trust wasn't shattered by betrayal. It was shattered by reality. You're asking them to understand grief that may never fully disappear. You're asking them to accept children carrying losses of their own. You're asking them to step into memories that they did not help create, but will continue to be spoken of. You're asking them to understand that some days you'll look perfectly fine while fighting a war nobody else can see. And if we're being brutally honest, That's a massive ask. Sometimes I don't think grieving people question whether love can exist again. I think they question whether anyone would willingly sign up for this. Because what you're offering isn't a blank canvas. It's a life that survived the fire. And maybe the hidden fear of those grieving isn't that you'll never want or find someone. Maybe it's that you'll find someone incredible. And it'll still be too complicated to keep, too damaged, too guarded, just too much. But maybe that's another lie grief tells us. Because the right person isn't and shouldn't be looking for your life before the fire. They never had access to that version of you. The right person chooses the person standing here now. Scarred, altered, battle tested, exhausted, more cautious, but also more grateful, more aware of what matters, and more intentional. Maybe that's why courage after loss looks different than courage before loss. Because before loss, courage is jumping without knowing what could happen. After loss, courage is jumping while knowing exactly what could happen. You know how badly life can hurt. You know how quickly everything can change. You know how fragile tomorrow really is. And yet, you choose hope, you choose connection, you choose love. You choose to live anyway. Not because the anchor disappeared, not because grief or loneliness disappeared, but because you finally understand something profound. The goal was never to remove the anchor. The anchor is love. The anchor is memory. The anchor is proof that someone mattered enough to change the landscape of your entire existence. The question isn't whether you're going to carry it. You will. The question is whether you'll allow it to pull you under or not, or teach you how strong you've become. Because surviving loss isn't the end of the story. Learning to live while carrying it is. See, maybe healing isn't becoming lighter. Maybe healing is discovering you can carry what once convinced you thought was too heavy. And you still notice gratitude. You still laugh. You still trust. You still build a meaningful life. Because the anchor isn't evidence that you're broken. It's evidence that you loved deeply. And quite frankly, if given the choice, most of us, if not all of us, wouldn't trade that weight. If losing it meant erasing the person who put it there. So we carry it. Not because it's easy or fair, but because love leaves fingerprints. And grief is now the price of having been blessed enough to have and share something worth missing. That thing that threatens to pull you under is the same thing reminding you that your life was forever changed by deep love. So focus less on learning how to let go of the weight and focus more on learning how to swim with the anchor attached. Not because the weight got lighter, but because you discovered you were stronger than you ever imagined. And every stroke forward becomes an act of defiance, an act of remembrance and of love. Because the anchor was never my enemy. It was never trying to drown me. It was simply the weight of loving someone whose absence will always matter. And I wouldn't want to know what it feels like to stop carrying that. Because if the weight disappeared, so would the evidence that she was here. So I'll carry it willingly. And I'll learn to swim with it. And on the days it pulls harder than I can bear, I'll simply swim slower. But you better believe I'm going to keep swimming. This has been Internal Affairs of the Mind, where we break in, strip it down, and get real. So hopefully together, we can build ourselves back up armed with wisdom. Peace and blessings to everyone. Be kind. Be a good human. Thanks for listening. I'm Greg Thompson, and we'll chop it up next time.